The bitter winter of 1942 in Stalingrad was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Snow swept across the shattered streets like relentless ghosts, and the air carried the acrid scent of gunpowder and smoke, mingling with the cries of men trapped in a battle that seemed to stretch endlessly. Amid this chaos, there existed a soldier whose name would be almost entirely forgotten by history, Karl Weber. His story, however, survived in fragments, carefully etched into the pages of a diary that would one day resurface decades later, revealing not only the horrors of war but also secrets whispered in shadows. Karl was not a hero in the traditional sense. He was a man of average height, wiry and gaunt from months of malnutrition, with eyes that held the faintest trace of curiosity beneath a veil of exhaustion. Before the war, he had been a clerk in Munich, a man who loved books, quiet streets, and the distant promise of a peaceful life. But that world belonged to another era, one that had vanished under the march of tanks, the roar of artillery, and the cold steel of orders from generals who cared little for the individual lives they commanded. When Karl arrived in Stalingrad with the 6th Army, he had been full of naive determination, a belief that he was part of a mission greater than himself. The city, however, was a labyrinth of ruin, buildings reduced to rubble, streets littered with corpses and debris, and once thriving factories turned into fortresses for snipers. Every corner of the city carried a story of death, every shadow a trap. Yet, even in this inferno, Karl clung to the diary his mother had given him before he left, a small, leather-bound book that smelled faintly of lavender and home. It was meant to be a private refuge, a record of his thoughts and fears, but it would become something far more mysterious, a testament to a man trapped between obedience and conscience. From the very first entries, Karl's handwriting betrayed the strain of the battlefield. The diary spoke of hunger, frostbite, and the constant drum of gunfire. But beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper observation, a subtle awareness of the human dimension of the war around him. He wrote of captured soldiers, not as enemies but as men who shivered like him, whose eyes mirrored the same fear and longing. He noted the children he glimpsed through shattered windows, the mothers who whispered prayers, and the old men who had nothing left but their memories. It was in these moments of observation that the diary first hints at a mystery that would consume Karl's thoughts. On December 4, 1942, he wrote, "There is a man in the ruins of Factory 14. I see him every day, yet I do not know his name. He moves like a shadow, silent, watching, as if he knows more about this city than anyone should. Sometimes I think he notices me, and his gaze carries a question I cannot answer. Who is he, and why does he linger among the dead?" The passage was brief, almost casual, but it introduced a thread of unease that would persist throughout his diary. This man, or perhaps ghost, represented a question Karl could not solve, a hint that the war was not only fought with rifles and grenades but with secrets, allegiances hidden in plain sight. Karl was a soldier, yes, but he was also a witness. And witnesses often notice the things that others cannot. By mid-December, the battle had reached a level of desperation that words can scarcely capture. The Soviet encirclement tightened like a noose around the 6th Army, and food rations dwindled to a cruel trickle. Karl wrote of mornings when he and his comrades would search the snow for scraps of bread, and nights when the artillery fire seemed almost sentient, shaking the earth with rhythmic cruelty. Soldiers succumbed to cold and starvation, their bodies abandoned where they fell, yet the command structure demanded movement, discipline, and obedience. It was during these days that Karl's diary begins to reveal the strain on the human psyche. One entry reads, "I dream of Munich. The smell of my mother's bread, the quiet rustle of the leaves in the park, the laughter of children. And then I wake to the blast of a shell and the screams of men. How can one reconcile these worlds? How can I write letters home when my fingers are numb and my mind feels as if it is being shredded?" Even amid despair, Karl exhibited a quiet curiosity. He took note of patterns in the enemy's movements, the subtle signals of Soviet snipers, and the inconsistencies in the German High Command's orders. These observations were not strategic in the conventional sense, they were personal. They were the notes of a man trying to make sense of chaos, trying to find meaning where none seemed to exist. And then came the first hint of espionage, or at least the whisper of something beyond the ordinary soldier's experience. One evening, Karl described an encounter in the ruins near the Volga. I saw him again, the shadow among the wreckage. He did not fire, did not speak. He simply watched, and I felt a chill not from the frost. Could he be a spy? Perhaps a deserter? Or something else entirely? My comrades would say I am imagining, but I feel that his purpose is tied to events I cannot yet comprehend. The ambiguity fascinated Karl. Who was this observer, and why did he appear in the diaries so often? More importantly, what knowledge did this figure hold, knowledge that Karl, despite his position, could not yet grasp? The entries reflect a tension between fear and curiosity, a subtle recognition that the human dimension of war is far more complex than maps, strategies, or victory reports. By late December, Stalingrad had become a city of shadows. Karl's diary chronicles the transformation with meticulous care, the frozen bodies in the streets, the way the snow turned crimson under artillery fire, the desperate measures soldiers took to survive. Yet it also captures fleeting moments of humanity, a shared piece of bread, a whispered joke, a note passed in silence between men who had little left but their courage. Karl also noted something that would later make historians pause. He wrote, "There are conversations in the night, words I cannot understand but which carry urgency. Sometimes I hear the click of a typewriter, other times the hushed voices of men moving quickly across rooftops. It feels like there is a layer of this city hidden from all of us, and I wonder if I will ever see it with clarity. Perhaps this diary is my only witness." Even as he documented the external horrors, Karl's diary began to reflect the inner torment of a soldier torn between duty and morality. One entry reads, "I fired my rifle today. The man fell. I cannot tell if he was a soldier or a civilian in uniform. I close my eyes, and I still see him, hear him, smell the smoke of his uniform burning. I wonder if history will ever remember me, or if I will vanish into the cold air of Stalingrad like so many others." By the end of part 1 of the diary, we see Karl as a man caught in multiple currents, the physical struggle to survive, the psychological strain of endless violence, and the mysterious presence of the shadowy figure whose purpose remains unknown. The diary is no longer just a personal record, it is a map of human endurance, a record of moral conflict, and a subtle chronicle of espionage hidden in plain sight. And yet, the diary offers only fragments. It does not tell us what will happen to Karl, nor does it explain who the shadow figure truly is. It leaves questions dangling, waiting for those who would later discover the pages to piece together the story. The diary, like the city itself, is a ruin of memory and meaning, fragile, dangerous, and hauntingly beautiful. The frozen landscape of Stalingrad seemed to have its own rhythm, a cruel, relentless heartbeat that echoed in the minds of every soldier who walked its shattered streets. Karl Weber had learned to recognize this rhythm, to feel its pull in the spaces between shellfire and shouted orders. Every day was a test of endurance, every night a maze of frostbite, hunger, and fear. Yet even amid this chaos, Karl could not shake the presence of the shadow he had first noticed weeks before, an enigma that had begun to dominate his thoughts. The man, or perhaps figure, moved like smoke through the ruins. Karl observed him from behind broken walls, sometimes catching only a fleeting glance, a hand disappearing behind a collapsed doorway, a silhouette slipping over icy rooftops, or the brief reflection of eyes in shattered glass. The shadow never approached, never spoke, and yet Karl could sense a deliberate purpose in every movement. It was as though the city itself had conspired to hide this presence in plain sight. One morning, Karl awoke to an unsettling quiet. The usual rumble of artillery was absent, replaced by an eerie hush that seemed almost intentional. Stepping cautiously into the open, he noticed tracks in the snow that led toward Factory 14, the same area where he had first glimpsed the shadow. They were unlike the footprints of any soldier he knew, smaller, lighter, almost hesitant, yet precise, calculated. He followed them at a distance, keeping low, listening to the crunch of his own boots as he navigated the debris. Hours passed. The tracks led him deeper into the heart of the city, past burned-out tanks and shattered apartment blocks. Then, he saw it, a flicker of movement near the Volga, where the ice had formed jagged cliffs along the riverbank. The shadow crouched, watching, but not at Carl. It was scanning the city, its gaze piercing into the spaces beyond sight, as if reading the invisible currents of the battlefield. Carl's pulse quickened. He felt both fear and fascination. Who was this person? A spy? A deserter? Someone working for the Soviets? Or someone else entirely, with motives he could not yet understand? The diary entry for that day reads: I have followed him, yet I do not approach. There is a method to his movement, an intelligence that I cannot comprehend. I feel observed, yet strangely, he does not threaten. Who is he, and why am I compelled to watch him as if our fates are intertwined? Perhaps this city holds secrets that neither of us can yet see. Carl's words hint at the duality of his experience, the war's physical brutality and the psychological intrigue of someone who moves unseen, whose presence challenges the very nature of survival. For Carl, it became a private obsession, a puzzle he could not ignore, even as hunger gnawed at his stomach and frostbite crept into his fingers. Meanwhile, the situation within the Sixth Army was deteriorating. Supplies were dwindling faster than anyone could track, and morale was reaching a breaking point. Soldiers whispered of deserters and traitors, of spies hidden within their ranks. Carl recorded these murmurs meticulously, noting how paranoia spread as quickly as disease in the cold. One entry reads: Rumors drift through the barracks like smoke. Men speak of someone feeding information to the enemy, of notes passed under doors, of voices heard in the night. I do not know if any of it is true, yet I cannot ignore the shadows that linger, both in the city and in my mind. It was during this period that Carl encountered another layer of Stalingrad's horrors, an internal espionage, a web of hidden allegiances that blurred the line between enemy and ally. One night, while scavenging near a ruined factory, Carl stumbled upon a small group of German soldiers who were not officially part of his unit. They were quiet, secretive, and their movements were coordinated with precision. From a distance, he observed them exchanging small parcels, muttering in hushed tones. The diary describes it as: I watched from behind the rubble. They were not like the others, disciplined yet secretive, moving with intent. I cannot say what they carry, but it feels like information, something vital. I feel a chill, knowing that even among my own, there are mysteries I cannot unravel. Carl's fascination with these hidden networks grew alongside his observations of the shadow figure. He began to piece together fragments of a larger picture, that war was not merely fought in open battle but in whispers, in unseen movements, in decisions made by individuals whose names would never appear in history books. The diary entries become increasingly introspective, blending the external chaos with the inner workings of a soldier's mind. In early January 1943, the encirclement tightened to a near impenetrable ring. Hunger had become a constant companion. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes, and the once pristine uniforms had long been reduced to rags. Carl wrote about the effects on morale. Men argue over scraps of bread, fight over blankets, and yet, in fleeting moments, they share warmth, a smile, a word of reassurance. It is strange how life persists even when death seems to rule everything. I cling to these moments, as though they are threads keeping me from unraveling completely. Amid this suffering, the shadow figure remained. Carl's observations shifted from fear to a tentative curiosity. He began to see patterns. The figure appeared near locations of critical skirmishes, always one step ahead of the chaos, always watching, never intervening directly. It was as though the shadow possessed knowledge far beyond the ordinary soldier, an intelligence that Carl could not name. One cold evening, Carl followed the figure to an abandoned apartment block. From his hiding place, he saw the shadow retrieving a small notebook from a hidden cavity in the wall, then disappearing into the night. This discovery sent a ripple of questions through Carl's mind. Why does he keep a notebook? What secrets are written there? Does he work alone, or is he part of a larger plan? I cannot approach, yet I cannot ignore what I have seen. As days passed, Carl's diary reflects a growing tension between the immediate struggle for survival and the pull of the mysterious narrative unfolding before him. The shadow figure had become a mirror to Carl's own experience, an enigma that highlighted the limits of his knowledge and the fragility of human understanding in the midst of war. Simultaneously, Carl's sense of duty continued to conflict with his conscience. He was ordered to capture Soviet positions, to carry out raids that led to inevitable civilian casualties, and to follow directives that made little sense in the frozen labyrinth of Stalingrad. His diary becomes a record of moral conflict. I obey orders, yet I see the faces of those who suffer, and I cannot reconcile my actions with the man I wish to be. Perhaps this diary will be the only testament to my thoughts, the only evidence that I struggled to remain human in a place designed to strip humanity away. The shadow figure, however, remained distant, almost protective in its ambiguity. Carl never saw it interact with the enemy or the German soldiers directly. Instead, it moved like an observer of fate itself, a witness to events that Carl would record but never fully understand. The diary entries began to hint at something extraordinary, that the shadow's knowledge of the city, of its hidden passages and movements, was unmatched, and that this figure might hold the key to understanding not just survival, but the secrets buried in the ruins of Stalingrad. By the middle of January, the diary shows a subtle shift in tone. Carl's descriptions grow more reflective, less concerned with immediate survival and more with the implications of observation, secrecy, and human resilience. He writes of fleeting trust, of alliances formed in whispers, and of the strange duality of fear and hope. I have begun to see the city not as a battlefield but as a web of stories, each life intertwined with another. The shadow moves among them, and I wonder if he too understands the threads he touches. Perhaps history is written not only in victories and defeats but in these quiet, unseen acts. The diary closes part 2 with an ominous note. I feel the end approaching, though I do not know in what form. The shadow watches, always, and I cannot shake the sense that what I have witnessed is only a fraction of what lies hidden. If these pages survive me, let them tell of the unseen, the unknown, and the human spirit struggling amidst ruin. The cold had become an almost tangible presence in Stalingrad, seeping into bones, lungs, and thoughts alike. Each morning was a struggle against numbness, each night a contest with nightmares that seemed to rival the reality of the battlefield. Carl Weber's world had shrunk to a city of ruins and whispers, a labyrinth where every corner could conceal death, or revelation. And always, somewhere in that ruined city, the shadow lingered. Carl's interactions with the men around him had grown strained. Hunger, frostbite, and constant bombardment frayed nerves to the breaking point. Comrades argued over scraps, some turned violent, others quietly gave up. Amid this pressure, Carl's diary became a sanctuary, a place where he could grapple with the dual weight of survival and morality. The entries became increasingly philosophical, questioning the nature of duty, honor, and the human spirit in a world gone mad. We are ghosts moving through a ghost city, he wrote on January 20th, every step could be the last. Yet life persists in the smallest moments, a shared cigarette, a whispered word, a fleeting smile. I cling to them, though they are fragile and fleeting. Perhaps this is all that keeps us human. But even as he recorded the bleakness, Carl could not escape the shadow. Its presence had become more deliberate, almost interactive. On one icy evening, he noticed the figure signaling with a mirror, catching the reflection of a distant light. The gesture was brief, but unmistakable, as if trying to communicate some message beyond words. Carl watched in fascination and trepidation. Could this be a coded warning? A secret alliance? Or merely a trick of the mind, conjured by fatigue and hunger? The diary entry captures his conflicting emotions. I see him tonight, and he signals. Is it real, or am I imagining patterns where none exist? I want to speak to him, to understand, but I cannot. And yet, I feel that some invisible thread binds us, one that will not be broken until the city itself is silent. Amid these moments, Carl began to notice subtle hints of betrayal and espionage within his own ranks. Rumors of informants and double agents circulated, creating a tense atmosphere of suspicion. Carl described observing a corporal exchanging folded notes under the cover of darkness, whispers passed between soldiers who were supposed to be allies. The city had become a chessboard of hidden moves, each piece with its own agenda. I feel the tension tightening like a noose, he wrote. Trust is scarce. Men look at one another with suspicion, wondering who might be feeding information to the enemy. And the shadow watches it all, unseen yet present, a silent witness to everything. The psychological toll of Stalingrad was becoming unbearable. Carl described vivid hallucinations brought on by cold and exhaustion, fleeting images of familiar streets in Munich, laughter that had long since vanished, and spectral figures moving among the ruins. Yet even these visions were tinged with observation. The shadow figure often appeared in the periphery, always watching, a constant enigma that blurred the line between reality and imagination. One day, Carl was sent with a small team to retrieve supplies from a bombed-out warehouse near the city's edge. The mission was fraught with danger. Sniper fire cut through the air like frozen knives, debris threatened to collapse at every step, and the cold sapped strength from muscles that had long been exhausted. As they moved, Carl's eyes caught a familiar silhouette across the street. The shadow was there again, crouched behind a broken wall, its head slightly tilted as though studying Carl personally. "I do not understand him," Carl noted in his diary. "I want to speak, to ask, to know why he lingers. But I fear the answer may be more than I can bear. Perhaps some truths are meant to remain hidden, even from those who witness them." The mission ended with heavy losses. Several of Carl's companions fell to snipers, and the team returned with barely half of the intended supplies. Yet in the midst of tragedy, Carl found an odd sense of relief. The shadow had been present throughout the mission, appearing to move strategically but never intervening directly. It was as if the figure knew the outcome and chose to observe rather than act, a presence both comforting and unnerving. As January gave way to February, Carl began documenting the duality of Stalingrad more explicitly, the stark contrast between life and death, hope and despair, visibility and secrecy. He noted that survival required more than physical endurance. It required the ability to read the unspoken language of the city, to interpret movement, signals, and whispers. And the shadow figure became the epitome of this skill, a master of observation, understanding, and discretion. "I think he knows more than anyone," Carl wrote. "He moves through the ruins with certainty, reading the currents of war that we cannot see. I wonder if he is a spy, a deserter, or something else entirely. I fear that I may never understand his purpose, yet I am drawn to it, as if my survival depends on deciphering him." The diary also reveals Carl's growing philosophical reflection on morality in war. He witnessed acts of unimaginable cruelty, both from the enemy and his own ranks, but also moments of unexpected kindness. A soldier sharing his last portion of bread, a wounded enemy soldier spared by a hesitant comrade, a fleeting smile in the midst of bombardment. These small gestures became anchor points for Carl's sanity, a reminder that humanity persisted even in the most hellish conditions. "I do not know if history will remember us," he wrote on February 10th, "but I remember. And perhaps that is enough. Every small act of mercy, every hesitation to kill, every whispered comfort to a dying man, these are the things that define us more than victories or defeats." And yet, the shadow continued to haunt him. Carl began to speculate about the figure's true identity. He wrote of several theories: a Soviet spy sent to monitor German movements, a German intelligence officer operating secretly within the city, or even a man with personal motives unknown to anyone else. Each theory carried its own weight of fear and fascination, and Carl could not dismiss any of them. "He is everywhere and nowhere," Carl mused in his diary. "I see him at the edge of my vision, in alleys, in ruined buildings, on rooftops. He knows more than I do, sees more than I see. And yet, he remains silent, untouched by the chaos that consumes us all." Part 3 also introduces a turning point in Carl's personal journey. He begins to experiment with subtle observation techniques, attempting to track the shadow without revealing his own movements. Using the diary as a record, he starts mapping patterns, recording times, locations, and behaviors. This meticulous documentation becomes both a survival tool and a psychological anchor, a way to impose order on a world that is otherwise chaotic. "If I can understand him," he wrote, "perhaps I can survive. Perhaps I can glimpse the unseen threads that guide this city and, in doing so, find my place within them." The part closes with a chilling reflection. "I feel the noose tightening, yet I am drawn forward. The shadow waits, patient and inscrutable, as though guarding knowledge that I am not yet ready to grasp. And I wonder, when the city falls silent, when the snow covers everything, will I have learned enough to survive, or will I become just another forgotten page in history? By mid-February, Stalingrad had become more than a city. It was a labyrinth of despair, ice, and smoke, where every building, every street corner, every shadow held the possibility of death. Karl Weber, once a young man with naive notions of duty and heroism, had been transformed by months of relentless combat and deprivation. His diary, once a simple record of thoughts and observations, had evolved into a chronicle of survival, morality, and obsession with the shadow that haunted the ruins. The shadow had become more than an enigma. It was a presence that Karl now felt as a force within the city. He saw it in the way certain skirmishes unfolded, in the timing of enemy movements, and in the survival of men who should have perished. It was as if this figure were orchestrating outcomes from the edges of perception, guiding, warning, or testing those who lived in the ruins. He is the pulse of the city, Karl wrote on February 14, invisible, untouchable, yet I feel him in every action, every movement. If I am to survive, I must understand him. And yet the closer I come to comprehension, the more dangerous it feels. The encirclement tightened, food and ammunition ran dangerously low, and the Sixth Army faced the suffocating reality of inevitable defeat. Karl's comrades were succumbing not just to bullets and shells, but to starvation, frostbite, and despair. In the midst of this collapse, Karl found himself increasingly drawn to the shadow figure, not out of fear, but out of a need for guidance, a silent recognition that this presence might hold the key to understanding the chaos around him. It was during one particularly harrowing night patrol that Karl witnessed something that would change everything. As he navigated a bombed-out apartment block near the Volga, he heard the faint rustle of movement, almost imperceptible over the roar of distant artillery. Crouched in the shadows, he caught sight of the figure again, but this time, it was different. The shadow moved with purpose, retrieving a small package from beneath a collapsed beam, then vanishing into a side alley. Karl's curiosity and dread warred within him, compelling him to follow at a careful distance. The diary entry from that night reads, I followed him through the ruins, my breath freezing in my lungs, my heart hammering in my chest. He moved with certainty, as though he knew every trap, every sniper, every collapse before it happened. And yet he did not notice me, not truly. It is as if he exists on a different plane, connected to something I cannot name, yet intrinsically part of this war. Karl's pursuit led him to a partially destroyed government building near the riverbank. Inside, he glimpsed a scene that defied easy explanation. The shadow was not alone. He was meeting with another figure, equally silent, exchanging documents, maps, and small mechanical devices that Karl could not identify. It was clear now that the shadow was involved in espionage, not mere observation, but active gathering of intelligence, possibly for reasons unknown to any soldier on the front lines. I cannot comprehend it, Karl wrote. Is he a spy for the Soviets, a secret agent of the Reich, or someone entirely apart from both? And what is contained in those documents? The knowledge could determine life or death for many, and yet I am powerless to act. The following days were a mixture of dread and revelation. Karl found himself more acutely aware of the city's rhythms, the subtle signs of impending danger, and the intricate patterns of human movement. The shadow had become his silent teacher, showing him, without words, the hidden geometry of survival. He began to anticipate skirmishes, avoid ambushes, and find temporary refuge in locations that seemed ordinary to others. It was as though Karl had inherited some fraction of the shadow's insight, a knowledge he did not fully understand but could rely on. Despite these advantages, the cost of survival was steep. The men around him were dying at an alarming rate, and Karl's own body had become a battlefield of frostbite, malnutrition, and exhaustion. Yet the shadow persisted, moving with uncanny precision, never engaging directly but influencing events in ways Karl could only speculate about. The diary reflects a growing tension between awe and fear. He is not just a man, I think. He is an instrument, a presence that war itself has created, or perhaps revealed. I do not know if I am seeing reality or some distorted reflection of it, but I cannot turn away. To ignore him is to court death, and to follow him is to step deeper into mystery. One particularly frigid evening, Carl made a discovery that pushed him to the brink of revelation. While scavenging near a collapsed bridge, he found a notebook, hidden beneath rubble, its pages intact despite the harsh winter. It was not his diary, though the handwriting was eerily similar, but it contained maps, coded annotations, and fragments of intelligence that suggested an organized network operating within the city. The shadow figure was clearly not acting in isolation. He was part of a clandestine system that Carl could barely begin to understand. "I have found a fragment of truth," Carl wrote, "but it is incomplete, tantalizing, and dangerous. Whoever controls these networks holds power beyond what soldiers like me can imagine. In the shadow, he is at the center of it all, a keeper of secrets too vast for me to grasp." The moral and psychological weight of the city pressed down on Carl like the frozen sky. He began to question the nature of his own actions, the obedience he had shown, and the small, quiet acts of mercy he had witnessed. Survival was no longer merely a physical challenge, it was an ethical and spiritual one. Each choice carried consequences that echoed far beyond the immediate moment, and Carl's diary became a repository for these reflections. "I do not know if I am a soldier or a witness, a participant or a bystander. The shadow moves with knowledge I cannot claim, yet I feel drawn to understand him. Perhaps understanding him is the only way to preserve some part of my humanity in a city that has forgotten it." As February waned, the intensity of battle escalated. Carl's unit was ordered to hold a key position near a ruined factory, facing a relentless onslaught. Men were falling all around him, and the cold seemed to penetrate even the thickest layers of clothing. Yet amid the chaos, Carl noticed the shadow again. The figure moved with precision, guiding soldiers away from imminent danger, signaling positions to avoid, and navigating the terrain with a knowledge that bordered on the supernatural. "I have seen him act tonight," Carl wrote. "He does not fight, yet he changes the course of events. He is neither friend nor foe in the conventional sense. I am beginning to understand that his role is greater than any one man, perhaps greater than this entire army. And I fear that understanding may come too late." Part 4 closes with Carl on the precipice of revelation. The city is collapsing around him, men are dying at an unprecedented rate, and the shadow figure's presence is more enigmatic than ever. The diary entries convey a sense of urgency, danger, and awe, leaving the audience on the edge of suspense, anticipating the ultimate disclosure in the final part. "I feel the end approaching," Carl wrote, "yet I am compelled forward. The shadow waits, patient and inscrutable, and I sense that my understanding of him, and perhaps the truth of this city, will soon be revealed. If I survive, these pages will tell of what I have witnessed, what I have learned, and the mysteries that even the world's greatest historians may never know." The final days of February 1943 cast Stalingrad in a cruel gray light. Snow fell in relentless sheets, mingling with ash and dust from the destroyed city. Hunger gnawed at the men of the Sixth Army, frostbite crippled their limbs, and the roar of artillery never ceased. Carl Weber moved through the ruins like a ghost himself, his body weakened but his mind alive with one overriding obsession, the shadow figure. After months of observation, speculation, and careful note-taking, Carl had pieced together fragments of a truth he had long suspected: the shadow was no ordinary soldier. Every movement, every signal, every encounter suggested a deliberate plan, a network of hidden operations intertwined with espionage, intelligence, and survival. But the shadow's ultimate purpose remained veiled, until a single encounter changed everything. It happened during the desperate defense of an abandoned factory near the Volga. Carl and a handful of surviving comrades had been tasked with holding a position critical to the German front lines. Artillery fire rained down, buildings collapsed under bombs, and men screamed as sniper fire picked them off one by one. Amid the chaos, Carl caught sight of the shadow in a narrow alley, crouched and calm, retrieving a small satchel. Something in the way he moved, deliberate, precise, compelled Carl to follow. The diary entry reads, "Tonight, I will see him face to face. I do not know what I will say, what I will learn, or if I will survive the encounter. Yet I cannot turn away. The city itself seems to guide me toward him, as though fate demands revelation." Carl approached cautiously, slipping through the debris, keeping low, and avoiding sniper sight lines. As he drew closer, he realized the shadow was not alone. Another figure emerged from the darkness, moving with equal precision. And then, as Carl's eyes adjusted, he saw the unmistakable glint of a metal pinned to the figure's coat, one he recognized from an intelligence briefing, a German officer, presumed dead weeks earlier, known for covert operations behind enemy lines. The realization struck Carl with a mixture of awe and terror. The shadow was a German intelligence operative, tasked with collecting information, coordinating covert activities, and ensuring the survival of key personnel within the Sixth Army. Every movement Carl had witnessed, the signals, the clandestine meetings, the mysterious retrieval of notes and packages, was part of a larger, secret mission. "He is not a spy for the enemy," Carl wrote, "but a guardian of secrets too dangerous for ordinary men to carry. Every action he has taken, every shadow I have followed, has been part of a plan I only now begin to understand." The operative noticed Carl at last, his piercing gaze meeting Carl's. For a moment, neither spoke. The city around them seemed suspended, the usual chaos fading into an eerie stillness. Then, without a word, the operative handed Carl the satchel he had retrieved. Inside were documents, maps, and coded messages, evidence of plans, troop movements, and, most importantly, instructions for survival. Carl understood in that instant that the shadow had been observing him not out of suspicion, but as a test. Only those who could remain perceptive, calm, and morally aware in the chaos were entrusted with this knowledge. Carl's months of observation, reflection, and documentation had proven his worth. "I cannot believe what I hold," Carl wrote. "It is as if the city itself has entrusted me with a secret too vast to comprehend. The shadow, once a mystery, is now a guide, a silent protector. And yet, the cost of understanding is not yet over." The following days were a blur of survival and clandestine action. Using the maps and intelligence, Carl navigated the ruins with a newfound awareness. He avoided ambushes, discovered hidden supply caches, and helped guide surviving comrades to safer positions. The shadow remained nearby, an invisible presence offering subtle guidance, ensuring Carl's every step was calculated and deliberate. But Stalingrad demanded its toll. Despite the advantages, Carl could not prevent the city from consuming those around him. His comrades continued to fall, and the relentless winter, starvation, and bombardment tested him to the brink of endurance. Each night, he recorded in his diary the mixture of grief, relief, and awe he felt. "Men die around me, yet I live. I do not know if this is fortune, fate, or the careful orchestration of forces beyond my comprehension. The shadow moves beside me, yet remains unseen to most. I am part of something larger than this war, something that demands understanding as much as survival." The climax of Carl's journey came during the final push of the Soviet encirclement. German forces were collapsing under overwhelming pressure, retreating where possible, surrendering where inevitable. Carl found himself trapped in a ruined building with the shadow operative. The city outside was a frozen inferno, artillery fire reducing everything to rubble, but inside, the operative revealed the final piece of the puzzle. "Carl," the operative whispered, "what you have witnessed, what you have survived, is more than mere chance. This diary, your attention, your humanity, it all matters. Some things in war are recorded in ink, some in memory, and some are hidden in shadows for the world to forget. You are now a keeper of these truths." Carl understood. The shadow's purpose was not only espionage or survival, it was preservation. He was tasked with ensuring that the lessons, the horrors, and the moral ambiguities of war would not vanish entirely. Carl's own diary, his observations, his ethical reflections, became part of this hidden record. "I realize now that the shadow was never an enemy, nor a threat," Carl wrote. "He was a guardian of history, of truth, and of conscience. And I, a simple soldier, have been chosen to bear witness, to record what others will forget." In the final days of the siege, Carl used the knowledge and guidance he had received to escape the most dangerous zones, guiding a small group of surviving soldiers to relative safety. The diary reflects a profound sense of gratitude and humility. "I have survived when so many have not. Not through luck alone, but through vigilance, understanding, and the guidance of a presence I could not fully comprehend. The city is silent now, yet its echoes remain. And so, I write, that those who come after may know the hidden stories, the unseen acts, and the shadows that shaped what we thought we knew. Carl's last entry is both haunting and illuminating. The shadow is gone now, retreating into the ruins, perhaps forever. I do not know his name, nor will I likely ever meet him again. But I carry his lessons, his vigilance, and his sense of purpose. The diary is my witness, and I hope that one day, someone will read these pages and understand that history is not only written in victories and defeats, but in the quiet, unseen acts of humanity, courage, and conscience. I have fallen, yet I am remembered, not in name, but in truth. The diary ended there. Carl's ultimate fate remains uncertain, lost among the thousands who disappeared in Stalingrad's final days. Yet the discovery of his diary decades later provides an intimate window into the human dimension of war, the moral dilemmas faced by soldiers, and the mysterious presence that influenced the course of events.